All right, what's up, guys? We're back with episode 3 of the podcast. That's not a podcast.
The podcast. We need an intro, dude. We need
I
somebody
know,
to create us.
I
I
know.
need like
Can
a
that
deep
be
voice.
the
The
intro? I like it.
Yeah, the problem is, yeah, I kind of like it, but the problem is we don't actually have a legitimate podcast yet. So the
Yeah.
issue is who introduces who. Otherwise, someone's kind of puts themselves out as a leader of the on the pack, and then that person's essentially taking over the podcast. So then they need a
That's true.
name
Oh
and
my
whatnot.
god.
So
So this is just
um,
like group chats that are recorded.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's what we should call the podcast when we actually formally name it. But anyways, I'm a physical therapist in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Recently started working with Precision Performance Physical Therapy out here. So if you need to see me, come hit me up. And then I'm talking to my good friends Logan and Chad down in South Carolina who own and run TriFit Barbell, a strength performance aesthetics gym with excellent coaching and in-person training, great facilities, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just gonna shoot the shit again for a third time.
Yeah, man.
Um,
Well, last time it was you kind of started asking us questions all about us, so we wanted to focus a little bit more on the therapy side of training, and we wanted to at least allow you to talk a little bit for our members who have been watching, and um, maybe if you give us a little bit more background on yourself, kind of your journey, because you're a newly appointed DPT, and tell us a little bit about that, man.
yeah, so for me, I don't know, I guess it depends who I'm talking to, but when I explain the origin story, the way that it actually happened was essentially I was a high school kid who had just started working out and kind of got obsessed with it. And I would always kind of think to myself, who has the answers to the question of how to get more jacked? And then at that point in time, I was like, okay, I saw you guys who worked at the gym that I was training at, and I was like, all right, these guys are personal trainers. They would definitely
Super
know.
jacked.
Yeah, exactly. They would definitely know how to get me jacked. So if I become one of them, then I'll know how to get jacked. So I was like, I'll just become a personal trainer first. And then if I get there, the logical conclusion would be at that point I would know how to get jacked. So that was my ultimate goal. So I became a personal trainer. Then I go to undergrad, I'm studying exercise science because I was going to just stick with along the same lines. I didn't know exactly what I was going to actually do with that degree. Um, but I was thinking, all right, I'm just going to go in and study exercise science and we'll see what happens. And then eventually got injured through my own training and again was left with the question of how do I rehab and prevent future injuries. So then I was like, okay, who knows how to do that? And then I was like, this physical therapist helped me out and they seem to know how to do that. So I can't live with this guy. I can't have him follow me around at the gym all the time. So if I want to know how to prevent injury and rehab injury, I'm going to have to become a physical therapist so that I can get more jacked and get better at training. So that it always was kind of this selfish pursuit of like, how do I maximize my own gym time? And that was always the kind of thing that spurred the next step of education and the next kind of step along that path. But obviously, the hallmark version is along the line. I fell in love with helping people and helping them through the injuries, and that's honestly very true as well. But yeah, that's kind of what led me into it, and then obviously decided at some point that I was going to pursue physical therapy as the career formally. And then went to Jefferson in Philadelphia and did 3 years of graduate school there, and then recently earned a doctorate in physical therapy from Jefferson. And
Max,
now,
why'd you pick Jefferson? Why Philly? Like you were growing up in South Carolina, so why Philly?
yeah, so I honestly don't have a good reason for you. It was really between my original plan was to go out to Colorado, right? So I wanted to
Okay.
go out to Denver because the physical therapist who I had worked with and who had helped me a lot, he went to University of Colorado, and I was always just kind of a fan of the
Brad?
Colorado. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
Brian. And
He's an excellent PT.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he's actually back out there now. But I was always a
Okay.
fan of Colorado, just from like a culture standpoint. I felt like it was similar to Canada in some degree. Like it was just more nature. You had snow. The people seemed the people were different in their mindsets as compared to South Carolina, and it felt more Canadian-esque. So I wanted to go out there originally, but not really for any good reason. But I knew I wanted to leave South Carolina just because I had moved back and forth a bunch of times, and I was like, I don't know, I'm ready for a move. Every 3 or 4 years, I'm ready for a move again at this point. It's just become like an
Sure.
ingrained thing. And obviously I've been in a relationship with Marissa, my girlfriend, for a long time. And she is from kind of the Detroit roots of her parents, lived there for basically their whole lives. She grew up in South Carolina, but she's originally kind of from the Detroit area. So for her, she wanted to go big city. Let's see what else is out there. Let's see what's different from South Carolina. So I applied to I applied to schools in Texas, Washington, Chicago, um, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and then obviously Colorado. And I got accepted into most of those, other than the one in Washington, because they only accept like 90% Washington students. And then Colorado happened to be the only other school that I didn't get accepted into. They waitlisted me. And by then I was just like, I'd already been accepted to Jefferson. I had already paid my deposit to reserve my spot there. Colorado was like the end of the application period at like March. And so I was already kind of committed to going to Jefferson by then. And then they waitlisted me. So I was like, no, thank you for your wait list. I'll go to Jefferson. And Philly's cool. It has a good like kind of powerlifting, fitness, rehab scene. It's very medically oriented. I mean, we have Jefferson, Penn, Temple, Drexel, U Sciences. So there's 5 kind of bigger medical programs there just within one city. So I was like, this seems like a good place to be. And if that's how the chips kind of fall at the end of the day, then we'll just roll with it. And Jefferson's obviously a great school, very well renowned, and I'm doing my residency there starting next month. So it obviously was good enough to get me coming back for more. So that's kind of what brought me to Philly. Nothing really pulling me here in
We've
particular.
got
But
a couple, I guess, I don't know if I can call them kids if I'm old enough yet, but we got some guys and
You
girls
are.
that are, dude, don't do that to me. Anywho, they're coming out of school, high school, definitely loving fitness. And, you touched on like, okay, who's got the answers for me? I think they see Chad and I, and we're coaching, and we got our start in personal training, so we generally say, dude, get a PT cert. Like, it's not going to hurt anything. But any advice you'd have for, because PT school is not easy, and I think it's something that you have to like really kind of buckle down and prepare yourself for. Any advice for them that's like, what are some challenges that they might want to face, or what was the thing that clicked for you that was like, hey, okay, I'm willing to kind of make that decision?
I mean, to be honest, I think myself, much like a lot of people that pursue higher education, they do so at least in part because it gives them a designated career field to go into, and it removes the uncertainty and the questions of like, what am I going to do with my life? So I think that it's really important when people are considering pursuing a higher education at that level, because there's obviously a financial component from a debt side for most people. That is a sacrifice that you make for that profession. But there's also, like you said, it's hard, and you're going through 3 years and obtaining a doctorate degree in a certain field. And you shouldn't be doing that in order to avoid the discomfort that uncertainty brings you when you're considering other career paths. And I think that that's what a lot of people do when they select things. They say, oh, this seems like a cool thing, and if I go to that school, I'll have a good job with a good salary, and so let me just pick that. And then some of those people end up pleased with how things turn out, but other people down the line, when they get a little older, they realize like, maybe I would have done something else, or maybe, there's other passions that I wish I had explored, but I was kind of afraid that, I would feel like a loser for 2 years after undergrad when I don't have a job that's directly in the thing that I graduated with. So I think for when we talk about advice for especially like a high school person going into college, is like, ultimately your college major probably doesn't matter all that much. And you can get into PT school with an engineering degree if you take the
Oh, can you
prerequisites.
really? 'Cause I thought you needed an exercise science undergrad.
Absolutely not. No, we had people in
Nice.
our
Okay.
yeah, we had people in
Good
our
to know.
PT class with theater degrees and art degrees and anything. As long as you have the list of prerequisites, which are relatively easy to obtain, like even if you did a major in engineering and a minor in biology or something like that, with some kind of intelligent picking of the classes, all of your electives being in the biology major, you can totally get all of those prerequisites done. Or at the, at the kind of quote unquote worst case scenario, you get a degree that's highly valuable, like engineering or like a business degree or whatever else that we all know that there are certain degrees that offer more return on your investment than others.
Sure.
And if you get one of those degrees that are relatively high quality and you get all your prereqs, or you do exercise science because you know that's the path you're going to go for sure, then you're in a good spot. But the kind of key point I think that's important to make is that while you're in school and you've chosen whatever major and minor that you want based on the return value and the potential for obtaining certain prerequisites, you need to be investigating the actual career from a practical standpoint, not just from an academic standpoint. So what I mean by that is, if you're going in and you're like, I like the study of exercise science because exercise physiology is cool, kind of programming for strength athletes is cool, these different metabolic systems, I like learning about, okay, this is how ATP is created and this is the byproduct and this is why creatine works because it gives me more of this, and you like all that stuff. So you're going to study exercise science, but then you go into physical therapy as just a simple kind of stepping stone byproduct of that. Well, that's a completely different profession, and you're not going to necessarily be applying or utilizing that information in the way that you want if that's the stuff that you're interested in. So people need to actually, and I even didn't like this for whatever reason in undergrad, the idea of actually emailing someone in your area that is, a physical therapist who works with athletes. Most of them would be more than happy to let you come in for a day and hang out with them, or even for a week, or even just come in for a Friday morning or a Tuesday morning and just spend some time with them, like shadow. You'll get some questions in, you'll get a legitimate appreciation for what is this profession, and is this what I think I want to do versus what I think that this is based on when I read the professional description in my kind of academic mindset of like, what does a physical therapist do? Well, they utilize exercise-based techniques to rehabilitate. Like, you don't really know what that means on a day-to-day basis when you're just reading the career description. And then you could see a physical therapist, you could see an exercise physiologist, you could see, a cardiac specialist, you could see a physician if that's something that you might want to do, you could see a nurse, you could see all different types of professions. And as much as it feels like I don't have time to do this because I have, I'm taking 18 credit hours this semester, when am I going to go shadow? It's like, dude, even just a Saturday morning shadowing one of those professionals could completely change your view of the profession. And you'd be surprised how many people go into PT school having essentially never walked into a PT clinic, or their only experience with it was a 4-week rehab they did when they were in 7th grade playing baseball. It's like, dude, you need to refresh your view a little bit. And yeah, you'd be amazed how many people go into a profession like PT without having ever experienced it. They don't even know what it is.
That was Chad. Didn't you want to dabble in PT there for a minute?
Yeah, I did. Actually, back in Michigan, I was studying at Michigan State for a couple semesters, kind of pursuing that. Now, that was just like the beginning phases where I had to do a lot of prerequisites and stuff like that. But Um, for a lot of different reasons, Michigan and the university just wasn't for me. I was racking up a lot of debt and my focus was not there. But that kind of advice, just like if I would have went and shadowed more PTs and just spent more time in that area, I probably would have came to the realization well before I dropped like, I don't even know what it was, like 20 grand in debt just for a couple of semesters. I mean, it saves you a lot of hassle. And it's not like, going to school and like, and realizing that is ever a bad thing. But for a lot of people, it's like when your passion meets your talent, then you're truly in your element. So find what makes you like passionate, but you also need to be like into it and naturally good at it. And there's so many different fields and directions you can take education now. So, but yeah, PT, like it sounded like it was going to be a good fit for me, but I quickly realized that it just wasn't. And but.
And this is a thing that like, so obviously you alluded to like some student debt a little bit, and I alluded to it, and it's obviously kind of a national issue in terms of the cost of education just rising kind of uncontrollably. And I think that it's important to recognize that problem that we in the United States have that's unique to kind of this country. To some degree, but I think that it's also important that people delineate between it being a disincentive for pursuing higher education versus it being a consideration of the package of sacrifices that you make to be in that profession. Like, I don't know if people consider working 80 hours a week as a sacrifice, or 80K in debt as a sacrifice. But if you're going to say be a physician, you're going to be working 80, 90 hours a week sometimes, and that's a sacrifice you're going to make. Does that mean you shouldn't be a physician? No, but you sure as shit shouldn't make the decision to be one without considering that work schedule. And it's the same thing with kind of the student loans. And not every school's tuition is created equal. That's far from the reality. So I think that there's always ways to approach it in a sense that you do get a reasonable return on your investment. But it's certainly something to consider, especially when you're going into the details of the logistics of like, do I really need to go to this school that's super expensive versus this school that's way less expensive? And that's a kind of a whole other conversation we could spend 3 hours on. But the point I wanted to bring up was that when we're talking about like, hey, you got to shadow before you select a profession and you got to do this and that, I think that it's important that people, and even myself from time to time, step back and realize that not very long ago, like I'm talking about my dad and especially the generation before him, like his dad, they worked at the closest coal mine that they could to their house, and they spent 40 to 50 years in that coal mine, and they didn't have a choice. Even my mom, I was on the phone with her the other day, and she was like, we were talking about finances and all this because that's what she did. She was an accountant and worked in finance. And I said something about like, wow, it's so good. It's so nice having someone who's, kind of in the finance realm in your family, just because you can help kind of guide me and educate me. And she was like, yeah, she's like, it's not what I wanted to do, but it was the only thing at my local college that was remotely interesting to me. So I chose it and I did it for 2 decades. And I'm like, that's just how things were. So there's an illusion of choice here. And I don't know if you've ever read the book, Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark
I've heard,
Manson.
I've never read it. Yeah.
You really should read it. But the whole book is kind of based on this underlying theme of we all need to lower our expectations and stop worrying about this facade of options that leads you to feel like all of the options are not good enough. So for example, physical therapy is a great career. You could go there and you spend a decent amount on school, but you end up with a good job with good benefits, with good vacation, with a good salary that's 85, 90, you'll get up to the 6 figures at some point. Like you'll make a good living. And if you compare that to, say, being a physician, well, now there's some pros of this and that make this not look as good. But then the schedule is really busy. So, I could be in this profession and then my schedule is better, but fuck, I don't make enough. And the vast like array of options and the different pros and cons of all of them make all of them look bad. None of them look like great, perfect options for you,
Who
because the reality is there are no perfect options. And I think that's something that's important to think about.
Well, one of y'all, I think it might have been you, Matt. I don't know. One of y'all posted this just yesterday. One of my favorite, I believe, Teddy Roosevelt quotes: "Comparison is the death of joy."
Yeah.
And when you start, I mean, it's at some point you got to pull the trigger and just do it. And we touched on this in the last talk. Was like, you know, I think you asked us, what was our hardest or most surprising thing, and we're like, well, we just didn't have a choice in the matter, so it doesn't really,
Yeah.
we just had to do it. But I think like just kind of nail on the head here is if you're considering any decision, try and get some experience in it before you commit. There's a ton of things you can do. Find the one that you can just at least just stick to for a minute. And I mean, even then, it's like you're saying we have all these choices. Nothing means you have to stay there. I mean, sure,
Yeah.
80K in debt, and you've been doing this for a couple of years, and you realize you hate your life. Well, I mean, just moving into another career and being happy about it, you'll probably make more money then anyway. But
Right. But even that idea of like, hey, I'm in this career and I hate my life. It's like, dude, if you had been born 100 years ago, are you telling me
yeah,
that you would hate your life? Like, no possible chance that you would be happy. Because if you tell me, oh, I would hate my life as a farmer, well, fucking be thankful that you were born in 1990. Because if you were
Right.
born before that, you'd have no goddamn choice. And are you telling me that if you were born anytime before 1990, you would be doomed to a life of unhappiness? Is that what you're telling me? And most people would probably say, no, well, based on the circumstances, it would all be relative. I'm like, yes, but figure out a way to have that mindset now, because like you gotta fucking understand that ultimately we all have it really, really, really good.
really
And
Oh
there's
well.
yeah.
still some people in the
Very
country
true.
that don't have it good, but the vast majority of people who are considering PT school or even have the option to go and get educated, even
Good
with a
point.
lot of debt, like you have it so easy. And even like, and I try to remind myself of this too, is like you can do like an income-based repayment plan for debt, right? Where you'll just pay 10-15% of your income towards your debt. And probably if you have enough of the debt, that income-based repayment is not going to even touch the interest that you're accruing. So you might have debt till the day that you die, but like the income-based repayment, it'll still only be a few $100 a month for the rest of your life. Like you're still making way more than that on a monthly basis as a result of the education that you got. That and I know people who have actually made this decision, and I don't think that it's the right financial decision by any means, but they've decided to just do the minimum payment on an income-based repayment plan, and the debt will die with them. And that's kind of the thing that they have accepted. And it's like, I would never advise that to anyone. But even if you take the big grand scheme perspective on it, it's like, okay, you have a $400 payment a month until the day you die. You'll probably have spent an insane amount of money on this, but you're making $4, $5, $6, $7,000 a month. Like, it's not that big of a deal when you take the grand scheme of things and you realize 60% of the planet Earth is still dying of starvation. And you're like, okay,
Yeah,
my
it's
monthly
true.
payment's not that bad. But
Max, you read a couple of books on, what is it, Dave Ramsey, like the financial advisor kind of
mhm.
guy? Do you think like people, at least going into like PT school and stuff like that, do you think that that's something that like people, if you're going to be racking up that much debt, maybe it should almost be part of the like academic like schedule? It's like, hey, not only are you going to school and you're going to rack up this much debt, you have a class that is purely based on how to manage basically acquiring that much financial debt with a school. Like, could that be part of it? Like, I mean, you took it upon yourself to go ahead and educate yourself on the matter of like paying back debt. But maybe for other people out there that want to get into PT school, what would you recommend to them as far as like planning and knowing what you're getting into and how to pay it back? Because I'm going to guess you have a plan now.
Yeah. So I mean, the big issue. So we do get some very slight education on debt repayment options. But unfortunately, like a lot of stuff in academia, like it's riddled with some degree of misinformation and bias, which is weird to think. But like, for example, the student loan forgiveness program, right, that was introduced 10, 11 years ago now. That program was you make 120 payments over the course of 10 years. So you're just making your monthly payment for 10 years. And at the end of it, if you qualify, you work for the nonprofit, you did this, that, and you checked all the boxes, your student loans get forgiven. Well, the federal student aid, the government essentially loan servicer that issues loans and approves loans and all that stuff, they come out with their data at the end of that 10 years. And of the 35,000 applicants, only 60 people got their loans forgiven out of 35,000.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
and their reasons are like, well, they didn't make all the qualifying, like you missed a payment, or your nonprofit that you worked for that did qualify 8 years ago, it doesn't qualify anymore because the standards change or this or that. So there's all kinds of reasons that they can deny it. But we even had a presentation at school that was saying like, hey, this is a legitimate option and like this is something to consider. And I was just sitting there, I was like, guys, you're going to be paying the minimum on an income-based repayment plan, not even touching the interest. And after 10 years, the government's going to come along and tell you that, oh, for whatever reason, we're denying your student loan forgiveness. And now you're starting at ground zero, maybe even worse than ground zero, 10 years down the line, and you're in your mid-30s. So something like that, where I was in the classroom and I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God. And I raised my hand. I'm like, hey, what about the 35,000 or 34,040 people that didn't get their, like, are you literally advocating for this as a viable option? But I knew enough because I read and listened to podcasts separately that I'm like, okay, I'm hearing this and it's not true, or it's not necessarily a fair representation of what financial options you do have. And so, yeah, Chad, to your question, like, it's super important that people educate themselves before PT school, before any graduate school, on what's the return on this investment, how long, like when I look at the tuition and I add the interest over the time that I'm in the school, and then I give myself the salary at the end of that, how long based on this calculator and how much would I have to pay a month to get it paid off in this period of time? I don't think anyone who I sat with in my classroom had ever done the numbers, myself included, honestly, at that point, had ever done the numbers of this is how much I will have at the end of 3 years in debt. This is my interest rate. This is how much I'm gonna make based on the averages, and this is how long is it. No one ever does that before they go to graduate school. And I'm like, what the fuck? It's like buying a house or buying a Mercedes, or like two Mercedes, and never knowing what's the return on this, what's the depreciation, how much am I going to pay per month. Like, you don't know any of that until you've already signed the paper, spent 3 years, and then boom, you get hit with it at the end. And so I definitely think it's important that people make those considerations ahead of time. Dave Ramsey in particular, because you mentioned his book, he has a few weird kind of positions on student loans. His whole thing is like, never be in debt ever. And if you're in debt, pay it off as fast as humanly possible, which I obviously agree with. But the idea of never, ever getting in debt, the practicality, just, you're a 22-year-old kid who graduated from undergrad, like, how long are you going to have to work as a bartender in order to make enough money to pay for graduate school? Right. The timeline here doesn't make sense. Like, you can accrue as little debt as you possibly can, and then you'll make a decently sized salary after, and then you can pay it off. And ultimately you won't have lost any time. You're not going to save up enough money to pay for graduate school in most circumstances, cash, which is something that he advises people to do. And maybe it's possible if you go to a small state school for undergrad and you work at the same time, like, there could be some options there. But So I'm not necessarily saying that any debt is going to be a horrible thing, but informed debt or like educated debt borrowers is super important, and don't ever rely on the school to give you accurate quality or even any information on it, because you might not get it there. I think that Jefferson did a good job of like including some of that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised that other schools get literally zero in education on that.
Well, you've been through it, man. So congrats. You're out the
Yeah.
other end. Let's talk about a little bit more about therapy then. Um, I feel like people get kind of like confused on the actual roles of doctors versus, like MD versus surgeon versus orthopedist versus physical therapist, occupational therapist, yada yada. The list goes down, right? Like, I think we know if we're feeling. I would now suggest to people, like, if you feel aches and pains from like a movement standpoint, like you get out of bed and like your back starts hurting, or oh, my knee's aching, I'm like, stay away from the doctor, go see the physical therapist. Maybe you could illuminate kind of why would I need, when would I go see, when do you feel most comfortable as a physical therapist, and like who do you interact with on kind of like a patient basis?
Yeah. So there are multiple kind of facets that we need to go into to answer that question. So for one, um, physical therapists now graduate with a doctorate level education, which means that that all that means is the terminology of the degree. So you have a bachelor's degree, you have master's degrees, and then you have doctorate degrees, of which within that category of doctorate degrees, you can have doctorates, a doctor of philosophy, which would be a PhD. Those people are generally just research based, or they're really looking at the development of knowledge within a certain field. You can have other doctorates that are considered clinical doctorates, which physical therapy would be one of them. A physical therapist, a doctorate level trained occupational therapist. I'd even probably, I'm not sure of the specific delineations, but like nurse practitioners who get doctorates in nursing would fall into there. Psychiatrists, or people who have doctorates in psychology, psychiatry, those types of things would fall into there. And then after that, you have MDs, which is a doctorate of medicine, or you can have a DO, which is an osteopath. But those MDs then follow a different career path, after which they obtain their doctorate degree in medicine. They undergo specialty training, whether it's residency and fellowship or just residency, in order to then specialize in a certain field and become family medicine practitioners, orthopedic surgeons, et cetera, et cetera. So they have the kind of the highest and longest path towards getting their medical degree and the subsequent training that entails. So you have academic doctorates, the PhDs, the clinical doctorates, the practitioners like me, and then the medical doctorates, which are accompanied by further training and further specialties. So it's important to recognize that when most people colloquially say, I'm going to see the doctor, they're referring to that last category of MD. They're trained and they have the residency, the fellowship, and they have a doctorate of medicine. That's who they're referring to when they say, I'm going to see my doctor. Now, your professor in undergrad who taught history and who investigates the development of the pyramids in Egypt from an academic standpoint and goes to Egypt and travels, they obtained a PhD in history or in whatever field. And you still refer to that person as, Dr. Smith or Dr. Lee or whatever their name is, because they have that level of education, in the same way that a nurse practitioner has a doctorate level education, or a doctor of physical therapy, you would often refer to them as Dr. Smith or Dr. Lee, but you wouldn't necessarily say, I'm going to see my doctor, and be referring to a physical therapist. That's just the colloquial use of the term. And I think a lot of people get tripped up because they're like, hey, my physical therapist is a doctor. therefore, is he the same thing as a family doctor? And really, I would probably encourage people not to say my physical therapist is a doctor. It's more of my physical therapist has a doctorate or is trained or educated at the level of a doctoral degree, or he has a doctorate in physical therapy. But that word doctor gets really squirrely when you're using it for a history professor, an English professor, a physical therapist, an orthopedic surgeon, and all of the kind of in between there. So the term gets kind of mixed up. So then, in terms of the practicality of like, okay, who should I see if I have what? Obviously, then there's a legal side that depends from state to state. So in almost all states have certain laws in place that allow physical therapists at this point in time to either see patients as the first line healthcare provider, which means if you have pain in your back region ish, you can come see me in New Jersey and I can do an evaluation, determine if it's appropriate for me to treat or if you need to see someone else. So I can be that first line provider for those types of things. And if I determine that your back pain doesn't seem like it's coming from a mechanical or movement based origin, and I think like, dude, you might have a kidney stone, I can refer you out to your primary care or to a specialist for further treatment or to the emergency room or whatever that is. So that the level of education now with doctorate degrees has allowed, based on the legislation in a specific area, for physical therapists to be first line healthcare providers. Now, in certain states, you have to have a certain, in Pennsylvania, you have to have 2 years of experience and then obtain your direct access license, which is a supplementary license that gives you the ability to see patients and treat them without ever seeing anyone first. And in all states, a physical therapist can perform an evaluation without having any direct access license or whatever. So the evaluation is fair game everywhere. But so there are some variations in who you can go see in what state for what. But if your physical therapist says, yes, you can come see me without a physician referral, then if you're having any pain that seems like it's of a mechanical origin or that you think that is related to movement, then yeah, you can absolutely go see that physical therapist if they say, yeah, I can take a direct access patient. So for most people like you, why would you go to a physician and pay a $60, $80 copay just to have them tell you, oh, your knee hurts? I think you might need physical therapy, or I think you might need another consultation. And even in a lot of circumstances is, all right, my insurance won't let me go see a specialist without seeing my primary care first. So I'll go to my family doctor. I go to my family doctor, $80 copay. Fuck. They say I'm a primary care. I'm just a family doctor. Like this knee pain seems kind of outside of my scope. Go see an orthopedic doctor. All right, I needed to get my primary care to send me to the orthopedic doctor. So now I go to the orthopedic surgeon. The orthopedic surgeon, another $80 copay, and they say, yeah, you have knee pain, but you haven't tried physical therapy first. Go see your physical therapist. So you just paid $160, saw two doctors, fit that into your schedule for them ultimately to say, go see your physical therapist. So in almost all circumstances, I'm like, dude, if you're having some pain, go see a physical therapist who you can see direct access, and you call any clinic, they should be able to tell you if that's okay based on your insurance and based on the laws there. So there should be no issue apart from just a quick phone call. And then I'm like, yeah, if you can, go see the physical therapist first, because they'll be able to screen you for any more serious pathologies and whether or not you're appropriate for their care. And if they determine that you are, then you probably saved yourself some time and money going through the kind of hoops to get there in the end. So yeah, so I don't know if that answers your question exactly in terms of like how to see who to see and what to see them for, but yeah, that's the skinny.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it does. It's one of those things that I think, like, I mean, you look at the medical field and even the past 50 years, and just massive amounts of new information and research we've come upon. Physical therapy is fairly recent, if I'm not mistaken, or at least as a way to treat pain or treat movement errors. And I feel like just a lot of people don't really realize, like, I think it's, here's the script, take your meds, be on your way. And now it can be like, well, hey, we can look at this issue. And if we do these things over the long term, we can effectively correct whatever it is with no medicine involved. You've just done it yourself, you know?
Yeah. And like, I want to advocate for physical therapy as a profession and tell people like, hey man, if you're having some knee pain, like go see a physical therapist. They have value that they can provide. But at the same time, like you say, okay, physical therapy is relatively young. It's young in the sense of like, okay, it's probably been less than a century that it's really existed, and probably in the last 30 years, 30 to 40 years, that it's really kind of begun to flourish in availability and kind of its presence within the medical field. But in its effectiveness for treating movement-based pain and dysfunction, I don't even know if I would say we're at a point where physical therapy as a profession is effective in doing that. And the reason I say that is because physical therapists are trained to work with someone in a hospital bed who just had a coronary artery bypass surgery, while they're also trained to work with a 3-month-old with cerebral palsy, while they're also trained to work with an 80-year-old with double amputations, while they're also trained to work with athletes in high school. And I'm saying this because the reality is you can't know how to treat all of those things effectively in all circumstances and all populations. And so you're trained in school to be a generalist. And much like with an orthopedic surgeon or with a family physician, they were trained, even though they're a specialist within family physicians, they're not a specialist for kidneys, they're not a specialist for livers, they're not a specialist for hearts, they don't know how to do everything. And the reality is that if you have knee pain and you go see any random 10 physical therapists across the country, you're going to get 10 probably very different approaches, only 2 or 3 of which might have been really guided by evidence and from a person who was reviewing literature and clinical practice guidelines and who's kind of staying up to date with that stuff. The other 5 to 7 of them may have given you something that kind of helped for whatever reason. But so as much as I like to advocate for it, I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think that unfortunately, if someone in Missouri asks me if they should go see a physical therapist, probably they should. But man, if I just say yes, I'm doing them a disservice, because I really want to follow up with like, yes, but try to find one that has this, that has done this, that goes here, that is in this type of setting, that has this type of experience, and that you talk to and says this type of thing and does this. So even for potential patients out there, unfortunately, much like every other healthcare practitioner, but you do have some vetting that you need to do on your end if you really want to see someone that's going to give you the service that you need and deserve. And it's not as simple as saying like, physical therapists can treat knee pain. They should be able to, but some of them can't. And I'm sorry, like, I don't know what to tell you.
But that's every profession. Like every profession, there's going to be.
Cut out or did I cut out?
You guys still there?
How dare you? Yeah, Chad, I can hear you. I don't know. You guys are.
Fellas.
I hear you, Chad.
I just got off.
Good.
Yeah. Are we back?
No. Nobody's moving.
Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Chad, you're frozen, but no, now you're gone. Logan's in though. All right, so we're back after those technical difficulties that we experienced. But I don't even remember what we were talking about. But We were
I think we were just touching on, you were
Well, just
saying
the
like,
pitfall, like not every PT is created equal, right?
right. And yeah, you were saying that
But I
every
think
profession kind of has that.
absolutely, and I think that comes down to the individual. Like I'm gonna throw out, like, literally this morning I was having a conversation with one of our potential new members, and she was talking about her experience with a physical therapist not but 2 years ago, and that particular situation, like I was almost dumbfounded by some of the things that she was telling me. Now, how she is like communicating what that therapist said to her could be out of context, like how she perceived it could be different than what they meant. But she had a full ACL and MCL tear along with a meniscus tear, and went and saw a physical therapist, and he advised her not to have surgery. Now, this is probably prior to having any sort of MRI, or I don't know how she was able to go see a physical therapist walking on a knee with that many tears. But he advised her, like, surgeries shouldn't be an option, and this and that. And I thought that was rather interesting. I'm like, well, I've never heard of like an ACL or MCL just repairing itself all by itself, unless it's maybe like a partial tear. And then she proceeded to tell me that she had some, when she wanted to rehab, I think she had some small shoulder trauma. She couldn't really explain to me exactly how this trauma was experienced, but he advised her not to do any sort of weight training whatsoever in order to increase, I guess, the strength of this shoulder. And again, totally taken out of context. I don't know how he did communicate, like, hey, weight training is bad. But basically, when she brought up that she wanted to do compound this, strength training, stuff like that, it sounds like he was deterring her from taking that path. And I know, from knowing you for so long, like that's very much the opposite of what you would recommend in many circumstances on how to rehab the body and make it more resilient to injury, is like do as much weight training as you can comfortably and still recover from. But that, a couple of those things I thought were super interesting to hear from someone that is a physical therapist.
Yeah. And I mean, like, to the surgery standpoint, like I just recently, or I guess not recent now with all COVID, but have been out of the clinic for a while. But when I was in the clinic kind of earlier this year, I had a patient who had both ACLs torn on both knees, and he lived without ACLs for a decade, and he had just gotten it.
Really?
He just got one of them repaired, and he was coming to me for the rehab of that. And he didn't get it repaired for that decade because he didn't have health insurance for a while, and he had some hard times, but he lived a like kind of perfectly functional life. He wasn't out on the football field like cutting and sprinting and doing all this and that, but like he was an active guy. He was a manual laborer. He was a carpenter, so he certainly wasn't sedentary, and he lived without ACLs for a decade. 2 ACLs. So
Wow.
and even back in the 70s, so the mindset kind of flipped. Back in the 70s, 80s, they used to say ACL, PCL tears, we do not need to fix those. But an MCL or LCL, we definitely need to fix those. Now it's the opposite. You go see a surgeon with an ACL or PCL, they almost always fix them. And you go see a surgeon with an MCL or LCL, most of the time they just let it heal kind of conservatively and scar up. So it's flip-flopped. But for decades, people were not tearing, or were tearing their ACLs and PCLs and not getting them repaired because the surgeons thought that was the better way to go. And those people maybe weren't living at a high performance life, but they were functional. So it isn't impossible based on the specific individual, their age, their goals, how the ACL tear happened. It's not impossible that that person would come to me, and I would encourage them to maybe consider trying to rehab that conservatively. Now, if they're interested in any real recreational athletics, probably that's going to be a different story. But if it's someone who's 70 and they have an ACL tear, they might, first of all, they might already have one. They might be walking around all day with ACL tears. They don't even know. But in the event that they do know that they have an ACL tear and they don't have a ton of pain and they're kind of functioning, I might be like, dude, just because you don't need also to fix an ACL today. Like you can wait a little while and fix it. So for that 70-year-old who has an ACL tear, it's like, we can see how this progresses over the course of the next 4-8 weeks, and then reevaluate the decision then. It's not something that, it's not like a pec tear. A pec tear, for example, most of the time you want to repair that right away because that muscle's in a shortened position. It gets contractured. You'll never be able to pull that tendon back to the bone. It's gone. Your window's gone. For an ACL tear, we're talking ligamentous tissue. It's not going to retract, get smaller. It's going to be exactly the same kind of condition in a year that it is now, which is why you can get it repaired. And maybe they'll do a hamstring graft where they take your hamstring and that becomes your ACL anyways. So you don't really need to repair the tissue that's already there. You don't need that. And so repairs are rare anyways. But the point is you can fix an ACL down the road. And so that's not as contrary as that seems to be, especially for people in the strength conditioning world. Like, what? You wouldn't repair an ACL? How is that possible? It actually is a somewhat common thing to see people conservatively manage ACL tears based on that individual's goals. But then the second person you mentioned, the telling anyone not to do a specific movement is stupid. And
get the hell out of here.
That's the best way I can kind of sum that up. You can tell people, first of all, you're not this person's mom. And I think that people need to understand that, like, even if they're a healthcare provider, you aren't the ruler of this person's life. You can't tell people what not to do. And you need to communicate that to patients as well. Like, I'm not telling you what not to do. I'm laying out the options. I'm giving you my recommended path, and you can accept to do that or not. But you are the person who makes the decisions for your own body and your own health. Just like I tell people, you probably shouldn't smoke, but I'm not going to tell you not to smoke. I don't fucking know, because the reality is, if you have cancer and you're going to die in 6 months, am I going to tell you not to smoke? I mean, that's not my place. I'm not like the moral arbiter of the world and on people's health. I'm someone who has developed enough resources to guide you and give you the likely outcomes or the potential outcomes of multiple different options of behavior. But I'm not the person who's going to sit here and tell you what to do. So there's an air of authoritative, egotistical kind of, I don't know. There's a lot of ego with someone who thinks that because they went to school and they have these fancy degrees, that they can tell you what to do or what not to do. So that's kind of a separate rant. But it's also stupid to tell people not to do a certain movement because it's unnecessary. And sometimes it's important to advise people not to do a certain movement temporarily to allow for certain tissues to desensitize and kind of calm down and let things heal, or to allow a surgical repair to heal. Like an ACL should not do certain things at that period of time if they want to maintain the integrity of their newly repaired ACL. If you want to go out and jump around after an ACL tear, again, I'm not your mom, but I'm certainly going to suggest that the likelihood of re-tear is through the fucking roof. So I wouldn't do it, and you probably shouldn't. But the reality is, in the circumstance that someone has a little bit of pain and they don't have something that they intensely need to protect, like a surgical repair, probably there is a way to not eliminate any movements, or at least only eliminate them for a very short period of time. Because at the end of the day, like, if you want to relieve pain with an overhead press, for example, like someone with shoulder pain, how the fuck are you going to know if what you did worked if you never overhead press again? It's the whole basis of test retest. I have pain with overhead stuff. And the person says, well, don't do that and it'll feel okay. Well, how am I going to know if it feels okay if I can't do it anymore? That's the thing I want to do. So you can't not do it anymore. And do you think you're going to be prepared to do something if you've never done it? Fuck no. Like this surgeon, if they're like, well, don't overhead press because it'll hurt your shoulder. You know what'll hurt your shoulder? Not overhead pressing, and then overhead pressing once. that's probably going to hurt your shoulder. But being physically prepared for it by progressively loading the movement in an appropriate way over time while still addressing all of the other potential physical qualities that will assist in making you a resilient human being who's tolerant to load, that is going to set you up to be able to do that activity in a way that doesn't cause pain. So it's always, first of all, I would never take, quite frankly, I would, outside of post-operatively, like if it's a post-op, you just had surgery, listen to your surgeon. If they tell you the precautions are this, you should probably listen to them. Outside of that, I wouldn't listen to a surgeon telling you how to or not to move. I would find someone else who practices rehabilitating people to and how to move to tell you what to do. But I almost never would listen to a doctor who says, don't do this. Unless they're following it up with don't do this for a temporary period of time while you're doing all of these other things so that you can slowly reintroduce that. That would be the correct answer, but that's not. I mean, I had a surgeon when I had my back injury that said, every patient that walks in here, first of all, he was like, you would be amazed how many people I see coming in here who hurt their back deadlifting. I'm like, that is horse shit. You do not get enough power lifters walking through the door, enough even record. I know you're not seeing a high percentage of athletes who are deadlifting with a barbell. So don't tell me that you see a bunch of people walking in with deadlift injuries. But the people who you see walking in with deadlift injury, it wasn't the deadlift. It was their lack of preparation to do the deadlift. But they told me never deadlift, never squat with weight, and never overhead press. And I was like,
really? They told you all that?
Peace out. Yeah, this was when I was in undergrad. It was my first year, my freshman year. He literally said, I recommend to all of my patients, never deadlift, never squat with weight on your back, and never overhead press.
So did he mean just never pick anything off the floor ever again? Or
never pick anything.
If you drop your keys,
hating on the barbell,
you leave them there.
I'm sorry, you're out.
If you gain 20 pounds of fat and then sit on the toilet, technically 20 pounds ago, had you picked up the 20-pound kettlebell, you would have broken the rule. But you didn't break the rule. And the funny thing is, because your weight gain loaded you progressively and appropriately to tolerate that activity over time. That's like the perfect example of this whole concept. But yeah, I've always wanted to email that surgeon and be like, you son of a bitch. Like 7 years later, 2 degrees later, and you were wrong.
That's insane.
But yeah, even when he was giving me the injection, because I got an injection of corticosteroids, when he was giving me the injection, he's like, I hope that after all this, you know what you can and can't do when you go to the gym. I'm like, fuck you, just give me the injection and
just want to scare you.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And they use this fear tactics all the time.
Sure.
Well, it's funny because we have Brian Keith of Myo Move in here, a physical therapist. And one thing, when he came and talked to us, his philosophy was, how do we get you back to doing the movements you want to do? And there's a process for that. It's funny that is such a there's an opposite mindset to that in like the medical or just kind of like the I don't know, I don't want to say older generation, but kind of the more medical mindset. But I guess more specifically, it's like in here with athletes, I think there's like a few best friends you could have as a medical entourage, and I think more people need to include physical therapy when they feel pain, or they just need to look at it as, this is something I'm going to be able to get back to doing. It's not something that I need to stop doing everything on.
Yeah, and I mean that is kind of what got me into the profession. Like we were talking earlier, I saw the physical therapist right after that surgeon, who actually, you guys remember Julia Tolman?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We still work out with her.
You don't remember her. Yeah, you still work out with her because you still live there. But
she listened to our previous podcast. She messaged me the other day about it.
Really?
Oh, yeah, man.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
But so the funny story is when I got back to Green, so I was in Charleston, right, when I saw that surgeon, because I had originally gotten hurt down there. Um, and then I saw a second opinion when I was in Greenville for the summer, just coming up for summer break between semesters, and saw a second opinion. And then they gave me a sheet, right? And they, on the sheet, it was all the physical therapy offices that they send people to. And there was one that was like in Five Forks over by the sports club that in Five Forks. It was like right across the street. And I was like, oh, I know
Yeah.
this area. Like, I'll just pick this one. And I don't even remember what it was called.
I think it was probably ATI.
No, this was when that ATI was a Proaxis. But the
Oh,
one that
okay,
they
okay.
circled was another word with a P that I don't remember what the clinic was. It was like Premier or something. But I just had in my head like, okay, physical therapy clinic starts with a P in this Five Forks area. I know it's like right here. So I'm driving up, and then I see like, oh, Proaxis physical therapy. That's where I'm going. So I pull into the parking lot, and I get out of the car, I walk in, and then Julia, who for anyone who's potentially listening, was a coworker of ours at the sports club where you guys were training. And at that time I was working the front desk. I wasn't training. But so she was a coworker, and she's an awesome person, but she was sitting at the front desk of this physical therapy clinic. And she was kind of like the operations manager there. And so she's working the front desk, and she's like, hey, what happened to you? Why are you coming in for physical therapy? And then I was like, I fucked my back up, and here's the papers that the surgeon gave me or whatever. And she's like, oh, actually, they didn't send you here. They sent you across the street. There was literally another PT clinic across the street that started with a P, and it was like Premier or some other clinic name. She's like, you're not actually in the right place, but we have Brad here, who he's from Colorado, and he owned this clinic there, and he worked with a bunch of athletes, and he rehabbed Phil Heath when he had a quad tear, and
This is
he
awesome.
helped like a former Miss Olympia. And yeah, so she was like, why don't you just come here? Like, it doesn't matter if they sent you to one clinic, you can go to anyone as long as you have the script in this circumstance. I was like, fuck it, yeah, like I'll stay here. And then obviously that was just like a super serendipitous circumstance that led me into an office where I was able to work with a PT who was an awesome person as a base, which I think most PTs tend to be cool, outgoing, like fun people. So any clinic anywhere, like at the very least, I think you'll get a very nice experience in most circumstances. But he was awesome. He was also super evidence-based. He was constantly reading literature. He was reading Adrian Lau's pain science information. This was back in 2014. And that was like early kind of pain science days when we were looking at a lot of the literature on that. So he was very up to date, very evidence-based, very nice guy with experience with athletes. And after having worked with him I worked with him for like 8 months, 3 months of like really rehabbing. And then I would just get these like off the cuff consult, like, hey, this is how my training's going. This is how I'm feeling, flare ups, this and that. So we would just kind of touch base once in a while. And the ridiculous value that I felt like he gave to me as someone who had certain physical goals and fitness goals, I felt like it was just like invaluable. I was like, dude, I would have paid him an exorbitant amount of money had I had it to be on my team and support me as a healthcare provider, and as part of the team of people I want around me. I want a strength coach like you guys to help me with my programming. And if I get hurt, having a physical therapist who's knowledgeable about this and evidence-based and works with athletes and coaches himself, like having that guy is so great when it's combined with quality coaching at the same time. So I guess this is just like a long kind of ego stroke for me, but to say that like I agree that having the PT in your corner who's knowledgeable about strengthening, about conditioning, about rehab and athletes it can be just such a good addition to the
Well,
scope of the team there. What are you
I
gonna say?
guess it's one of those things that like what I'm trying to get at is in here. I think of the general like people just general fitness population. They've gone through life, and the answer to any issue that's come up with them, I guess in like a biological sense, has been go see what we colloquially call the doctor. But in this, I think in this day and age, a lot more people are getting into fitness, particularly the barbell lifts. And when you see pain or issue that has been derived from the gym, or at least you perceive as, oh, I did this in the gym, I think it's much more beneficial to have somebody in your corner that says, one, I studied movement, I know athleticism in all forms, and two, I understand what that means to you and getting you back to doing that thing. And then three, having some sort of methodology or a structure that gets you through that. And I don't think, I guess I don't understand why people don't see physical therapy as a much more one, not only a blanket statement kind of healthcare providing, but also as if I'm in the gym in any sort of capacity, it's not really my my doctor that's going to be the one that to help me anymore if something comes up.
Yeah, like I always think it's hilarious where it's like, please consult your doctor before beginning this exercise routine, like
Exactly.
on the different days.
Yeah.
Like, why the fuck are you going to consult them? What are they going to tell you?
If he
Like, they
tells
don't.
you not to, like, what the,
Yeah, like I get it. Okay, if you have a cardiac issue or if you have a pacemaker, if you have all these other like extenuating circumstances, but for someone who's generally, I'm like, dude, what the fuck are they going to tell you? They're going to be like, I don't. Exercise is great. I don't know. I guess you should probably do it. So the value there is low in comparison to like what you're saying. But again, I don't want to also like put down other professions and the value that they offer, because the reality is like fucking people need surgery. It's like you tear your ACL, you're an 18-year-old in high school and you're trying to go to college and play football, you need surgery. And you better hope that there's a surgeon out there who's obsessed with maximizing outcomes with certain ACL repairs to give you the best surgery you possibly can have. And I think sports med docs and sports med surgeons, and a lot of like what we call non-operative orthopedic surgeons, or not surgeons, but non-operative orthopedics. Um, a lot of those guys are actually very supportive in getting people back to what they want to do. It's more the kind of general run of the mill, either family physician or kind of general surgeon, someone who's doing more kind of knee replacements, hip replacements, and he's seeing a lot of what he perceives as being these wear and tear things. So he's associating that with like strenuous exercise. And I just shared a study the other day that relationship does not exist. But so those are often the surgeons that will give you narratives that are dangerous, like don't do this, don't do that. And the surgeon that I saw for my spine was at a spinal institute. He wasn't a sports medicine based surgeon who's looking to get you back to what you want to be doing. So just like I was talking earlier about, you got to vet your PT to make sure you find someone who can get you where you want to be. Man, you got to vet your surgeon, and sometimes you got to see multiple surgeons for multiple opinions to kind of compare what is being said across the board. And is one of them talking about how careful I need to be after this, or is one of them talking about, how much more I'm going to be able to do? Like, what are the conversations having? And people need to vet. They need to vet everyone. I mean, you need to always see like, okay, who's this person I'm about to let cut me open, or who's this person I'm about to let run the programming of my knee rehab. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as like, oh, you have this degree, then you definitely know the answers.
yeah.
That's not the case. But I mean, if I were to say, hey, or say you had someone walk up to you at TriFit and they say, hey, I'm in for a day. I'm from Texas. I live in this small town in Texas, and I'm getting coached by a powerlifting coach out there at a local high school, who's the kind of high school strength coach, who's also does powerlifting on the side. What would be your first reaction in terms of that person saying like, yeah, I'm about to drop $500 for their program?
I hope you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're like,
I mean, yeah,
what are the chances that
yeah.
this guy knows what he's doing? You're like,
Right.
it's not a
That's a
good,
really good point. Yeah.
I can't just
Yeah.
say, oh, powerlifting coaches. Yeah, powerlifting coaches are an excellent profession. Like they're any powerlifting coach anywhere around the country, they will definitely get you strong while minimizing your risk for injury and doing it in a way that supports your individual needs. Like, how many people actually can provide that level of programming when you look at the totality of that,
Yeah. Exactly.
that profession? So it's with everything. It's like some people are going to be about that life and some people aren't, and usually the people you want to
Sure.
see are the people who do it themselves. Like, find a PT who lifts if you want to get back to lifting. Find a surgeon who lifted or who played college sports. If one that is in shape, and most of the time that at least gives you some layer of security that, like, all right, if this surgeon's in shape, he's definitely run into some injuries himself at certain points in time. And maybe he's even had a couple surgeries. And then he knows the risks that maybe I won't get back to what I want to do. Maybe I will. And he probably takes that decision more seriously because he's had to make it. And he's probably had to rehab things non-operatively. And he probably sees the value in that and pays more attention to, who he's sending people to. So even something as simple as, like, I need to find an orthopedic surgeon who lifts, that might cut down the number of potentially negative experiences with surgeons vastly, and ensure that you see someone who's of high quality and who's going to, ensure that you're getting what you need to support your goals. And it's like, it had nothing to do with the school they went to, the residency they did, the fellowship they did. It's like, can you lift 225 off the ground? If you can
I'm
cut
gonna
open
need you
my
to
knee.
deadlift before I work with you.
Yeah. You just walk in with like a 50-pound kettlebell and you're like, can you
Yeah.
get this overhead somehow? If you can, you got my business. Yeah.
That'd be an amazing screening. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's something you should do with, like, anybody you get involved with, right? Is at least letting them demonstrate they've done it prior, or I don't know, you kind of mesh in the same mindset,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and plus it's just more fun, honestly. Like, a lot of times you're working with a PT and you're going to be with them for maybe an hour, 2 hours a week for 8, 12 weeks. You might want to stay in touch with them for months or years afterwards. And I mean, for the sake of just the community of, like, hey, I would want to see a PT who does CrossFit because I do CrossFit, and that would be a better experience. It'd be more fun. Like, take all of the evidence and the effective care and all that stuff out of it. Like, I would enjoy the experience more,
It's probably a trust aspect of it as well, as like when you have someone that comes from a background that's similar to your own and they start to preach about, hey, this is my experience and this is the reason why I prescribe certain exercises and recommendations because this is where I've been. It's like you want to be able to trust that individual with your health and with ultimately the outcome of your PT and your experience. It's like because I went and saw Brad as well, and like I really enjoyed working with him when I tweaked my back a couple times. There were short visits, a couple dry needling sessions, some gentle manipulation, and some couple of exercises, drink more water. But it was nice to just talk to somebody that, yeah, like you said, that like just has that background, has that understanding, appreciates the fitness world or aspects of it. And I felt like I could trust him a lot more with my condition than if you go to someone that's immediately looking at you like, well, you hurt your back because you deadlifted. Like, well, that was dumb. You shouldn't have deadlifted. It's like, right. I'm not going to trust you with my health,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, yeah, that's all over the place. But at the same time, it's like, if I walk into a CrossFit gym and I'm like, hey, I'm a physical therapist, I think most people would probably buy into, like, all right, this guy probably has some value to offer because he sort of kind of looks like he lifts, and at least at the very least, he's bench pressed some weight, he's squatted some weight, he's deadlifted some weight, he's done some metcons, like he kind of knows what's going on. So the trust is there from kind of a baseline. But at the same time, like, I had patients being referred to me who were coming to see me because they were 85 and got a knee replacement. And there was some sense of distrust, or maybe some barrier or obstacle to get to the point that I have gotten this person to buy into who I am and what I can do to help them, because I'm a seemingly semi-athletic dude with tattoos who's bald and very young. And so the 85-year-old post-hip replacement might have a little bit more difficulty trusting me than a seasoned 50-year-old clinician who's still in shape and kind of, seems more like he's been around the block. So the trust thing goes all kinds of different ways. And I think that it's just important that you find someone that aligns well with you. And that's okay if I'm not that guy, and that's okay if I am that guy. So it's important that people find people they're comfortable with, especially in their healthcare provider, independent of any other factors like education and what they do and where they went.
Well, guys, I think we're getting to about an hour here, but before we split it up, I wanted to at least ask you, Max, you excited, man? So you're about to kick off into the real world and be in this job, right?
Adult.
Are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. You're all grown up, man. How you feeling?
Yeah.
You ready for it?
Yeah, I mean, I have, so I start at, for anyone who's listening out there in the world, we might have like
All
4
three,
or 5. Yeah, I was going to say,
right?
we might get 4 or 5 views on this, but if you're in Philadelphia or in the kind of Pennsylvania area, I'm going to be at a clinic called Precision Performance Physical Therapy. We got 2 locations. One's in Philly, one's in Garnet Valley, and it's a kind of intense strength conditioning based facility. One of them is oriented more towards field sports and team sports. The other one is inside of a CrossFit gym. So I'm definitely stoked to be involved with them and working with those populations and those people. So I'm ready to be back in that environment. Yeah, it's going to be great. And then I'm doing my residency too at the same time, residency in orthopedics at Jefferson to be an orthopedic clinical specialist, which I'm excited about. That starts next month as well. And then I'm also teaching. I'm going to be assisting with the biomechanics coursework at Jefferson as well. Just in kind of more of the lab portion, kind of some of the hands-on skills with the students there. So yeah, a lot of things coming up in the next month. So I'm trying to enjoy my last couple of weeks of playing video games and having a stress-free life. And then I'll get into honestly, I'm more stressed now, to be honest, than I will be probably in a month, because having nothing to do is more stressful than having.
It's the calm before the storm. Yeah, you start worrying about the future. Yeah.
No, I'm not even worrying about
anticipation.
It's just not even healthy to. It's not healthy to live with yourself and your own thoughts. You need something to like keep you occupied, man. It's
absolutely.
I'm trying to.
It's like the worst thing that can do to a human being is put us in solitary confinement. So leave us alone with our own thoughts, and yeah,
like third world countries, they treat depression in certain cultures by making the person work. You're like, you're depressed? All right, well, you're going to be the guy who for the next week has to walk 10 miles there, 10 miles back to get the water. And like, that's how they, in other cultures, have treated depression. So there's some truth to that in terms of like, man.
It's the endorphins, bro.
Endorphins. Cool, man. So I enjoyed this conversation. There's a lot of just me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, same.
No, I like it. I hope it gives people an insight a little bit into the therapy world. And I'm sure in our future conversations, like there's just so many topics that like we could spend hours in just what we barely touched on here, so hopefully we'll do this more, man.
Yeah, we certainly will get to all that stuff down the road. Next time, I want to talk a little bit more about legitimately like programming, strength conditioning, like getting people strong. What are some practical stuff that people can do in their programming to get there? So I think that that'll be good for people to hear your guys' kind of perspective and thought process on that. But
awesome. Yeah, that'll be fun stuff.
Yeah. So apart from that, it was good to talk to you guys.
Max, it was a pleasure as always, my friend.
Yeah, thanks, buddy.
We'll plan for next week. So I'll talk to you guys later.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.